All right. Welcome back, everyone. Looks like we've got a pretty eclectic mix of stuff to get through this time.
Yeah, really interesting stuff.
We've got articles and ancient texts, even some like raw research notes someone sent in.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's all kind of centered around this theme of ancient mysteries,
Right.
and, well, maybe alternative isn't the right word, but alternative explanations for things we thought we knew, I guess you could say.
Yeah, definitely some alternative perspectives in here.
For sure. So are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. I always love a good deep dive into these less conventional viewpoints.
Okay, so one of the first things that kind of jumped out at me was this translated Coptic text about the crucifixion of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and well, it paints a much different picture than what we're used to hearing.
Really?
Oh, yeah, like for instance, it mentions Pontius Pilate having dinner with Jesus and even offering up his own son to be crucified instead of Jesus.
Wow, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So I'm curious, from your perspective, does any of that seem even remotely plausible, or is it just like pure fiction?
Well, I mean, you always have to be cautious with these ancient texts, right? There's always the possibility of embellishment.
Of course, yeah.
But this difference from the traditional narrative is pretty striking, you have to admit.
Yeah, it is.
And it makes you think, like, why create this alternate version? What purpose would it serve?
Right, exactly.
I mean, maybe it was trying to make Pilate look better.
Interesting.
Or maybe it reflects, like, a totally different theological understanding of what happened.
That's a really good point.
Makes you think about how stories change over time.
Yeah, like how they get rewritten or reinterpreted as like beliefs and power structures shift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And it makes you wonder like what other alternative accounts of historical events are out there, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, who knows what we haven't uncovered yet.
Right.
Now, there's this other detail in this Coptic text that I couldn't get over.
Right. It says that Judas had to identify Jesus with a kiss because Jesus could shapeshift.
Whoa, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Shapeshifting.
Yeah, I know, right? Sounds straight out of a fantasy novel.
It does.
So is I don't know, is there anything historically or culturally that could even begin to explain that?
Well, it's definitely a bold claim,
For sure.
but it's interesting to think about it in the context of, like, ancient beliefs about magic and the supernatural.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, shapeshifting pops up in a lot of cultures,
Right.
often connected with gods or powerful beings.
Yeah, like trickster gods and stuff.
Exactly. So maybe this detail was meant to emphasize Jesus's divinity,
Okay, that makes sense.
or to just add a layer of mystery and intrigue to the story.
Yeah, like make it more exciting.
Hey, make people really pay attention.
So maybe instead of taking it literally,
Right?
we should be looking at it more symbolically.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a way to convey a deeper meaning about, I don't know, Jesus's power, or even the challenges of recognizing his true identity.
Right, like maybe even his followers didn't fully understand him.
It's like even back then, fake news was a problem.
Uh-huh. Yeah, maybe.
So it's a good reminder that these ancient texts often worked on like multiple levels of meaning.
Absolutely. They weren't meant to be taken at face value.
This whole idea that ancient people might have just misinterpreted advanced tech as like divine power.
Right.
It's a trip, right?
Totally.
It makes me think about some of the other things you sent over, like this article about the thermal camera footage.
Uh-huh.
They caught this jellyfish-shaped UFO hovering over a military base, apparently.
Interesting.
Yeah. What do you think? Could this be history repeating itself? Like, is modern tech being seen as something supernatural?
Well, it's definitely a connection worth exploring, right?
Yeah.
It kind of speaks to this theme that keeps popping up in all these materials you sent.
Okay, what's that?
Like this blurring of the lines between science and the unexplained.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
We live in a time where technology is advancing so fast. It's mind-blowing, really.
Yeah.
So it's not hard to imagine how something beyond our current understanding could be seen as supernatural.
Right, like we can barely keep up with what we're creating ourselves.
Exactly.
And with that in mind, I think it's the perfect time to bring up this article about the 12,000-year-old Anunnaki giant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
That is old.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you give us like the Anunnaki 101?
Sure. So the Anunnaki are from ancient Sumerian mythology,
Okay.
which is like even older than the ancient Egyptians.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
They were seen as super powerful gods, basically,
Okay.
responsible for the creation of humanity,
Yeah.
And they were credited with having all this advanced knowledge and technology.
So if we Yeah, just for a second, entertain the possibility that this discovery is legit.
Yeah.
It kind of throws a wrench into everything, right?
It does, yeah.
Like, could the Anunnaki be the real basis for all those ancient myths about gods walking among us? I mean, could they have been actual beings?
Right.
With tech so advanced that it was just misinterpreted as magic or the supernatural?
It's a really, really fascinating question.
It is.
And it gets to the core of what we're looking at here.
It's a...
The idea that our understanding of the past,
Right.
maybe even the present, is incomplete.
Totally. It makes you think about what other mysteries might be hiding in plain sight.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Just waiting to be discovered.
You never know what's out there. Speaking of hidden mysteries, there's some stuff in here that dives into the very nature of reality itself.
Oh, yeah, like that article about us maybe living in a super advanced simulation.
Right.
I gotta say, that one really blew my mind. I mean, it's not something I'd ever seriously considered before.
Uh-huh.
But the way they laid out the arguments, it was pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
They even brought up this scientist who claims there's evidence for it in the Bible.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an idea that's gaining traction lately.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Even some big-name physicists and philosophers are buying into it.
Wow. It's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah, the idea that everything we experience could just be a complex computer program, you know?
Right. Designed by beings way smarter than us.
Exactly.
It definitely makes you question what's real.
For sure.
Speaking of questioning what's real, what about this article on the changes happening in our solar system
Oh, yeah.
and how they might be connected to climate change here on Earth? What'd you think of that one?
I think the most interesting part was the idea that forces we don't fully understand are influencing our world in ways we haven't even figured out yet. Forces beyond our planet, even.
That is pretty humbling.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we're just one small part of a much bigger system.
A cosmic web, like they were saying.
Exactly, a web of interconnectedness that we're only beginning to understand.
Makes you feel pretty small.
It does. And, you know, while we're on the topic of interconnectedness, what about that article with the Greek title?
Oh, yeah. Esiapasismenos ankezisos matrix.
Ha, that's the one.
I took some Greek in college, and I think that means something like, are you determined to escape the matrix?
That's it. So we're back to simulation theory.
Full circle.
What was their take on breaking free from this potential illusion?
Well, they emphasized that real liberation comes from within. They said external forces can't really free us unless we choose freedom for ourselves.
Interesting. So it's about recognizing our own power, our own agency.
Right. Taking responsibility for our perceptions and choices.
Instead of waiting for some big event or outside force to come along and change everything.
Exactly. It's about a personal awakening.
A shift in consciousness.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's about questioning, seeking knowledge, always pushing to expand our understanding of reality.
And in a way, isn't that what we're doing right now?
With this deep dive, I think so.
Yeah, it's like by exploring these alternative ideas, these unconventional theories.
We're challenging ourselves to think outside the box.
Exactly. See the world from new perspectives.
That's what it's all about.
Which brings me to another article you dug up, the one about Project Bluebeam.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I know it's a conspiracy theory and all, but it plays on some of those anxieties about technology and control that we were talking about earlier.
It does, for sure.
Can you give our listeners a quick rundown of what that theory is all about?
Basically, it claims that NASA is planning to use advanced technology to stage a fake alien invasion.
Wow.
Or even like a second coming of Christ.
Whoa.
All as a way to establish a new world order.
Okay, that's pretty out there.
It is, but it taps into a real concern, you know?
About technology being used for manipulation and control.
Right. I mean, especially with things like deep fakes and AI-generated content becoming more and more common.
It's getting harder to know what's real.
Absolutely.
So even if we don't buy into Project Bluebeam specifically,
right,
it still serves as a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it highlights the importance of critical thinking and media literacy, you know?
Questioning what we see and hear.
Especially now, we need to be extra careful about what information we consume and trust.
That reminds me of that other article you included, the one about misinterpreting the symbolic history in the Apocryphon of John.
Right.
I gotta admit, I'm not really familiar with that text.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give us a little background on that?
Sure. So the Apocryphon of John is an ancient Gnostic text.
Okay.
And it's full of symbolism and allegory.
Yeah.
The article is basically warning against taking these kinds of texts literally.
Makes sense.
They argued that we need to look beyond the surface to understand the real meaning behind the symbols and stories.
So it's not just about what it says, but how we interpret it.
Exactly.
We have to consider the historical context, the author's intent, our own biases, all of that.
Exactly. And that applies to all information, not just ancient texts.
Right. Good point. So we've talked about ancient texts, UFOs, simulations, the potential for technological manipulation, and the importance of careful interpretation. Is there anything else in this mountain of research you put together?
There's one more article I wanted to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
It ties back into our conversation about liberation in the Matrix.
Okay.
This one critiques the idea of waiting for an event to free us from the Matrix.
I see.
It argues that true liberation is an ongoing process, a journey.
Yeah, a journey of self-discovery and conscious choice, right?
Exactly.
Instead of relying on external forces or expecting some sudden big change,
Right.
it's about taking ownership of our own awakening.
Exactly.
You know, after going through all of these different perspectives, it feels like the real takeaway here is that the value comes from engaging with these ideas, questioning, exploring, forming our own understanding of the world.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the process of discovery.
Right.
Understanding that there are no easy answers, no quick fixes.
It's about the journey, not the destination. It's really interesting, right, how so many of these sources, even the ones that seem pretty far out there, are really about taking control of your own narrative.
It is, yeah.
Whether it's questioning like official historical accounts or thinking about the possibility that we're in a simulation, it all seems to come back to that individual choice.
I think you're right. It speaks to this need we all have to try and make sense of the world around us, you know?
Yeah.
We're natural curious, always trying to find answers and figure out where we fit in
Makes sense.
the grand scheme of things.
So let's say someone's listening to this and they're feeling a little overwhelmed by all these ideas.
Yeah.
Ancient mysteries, UFOs, the nature of reality.
It can be a lot to take in.
What would you say to them? Where do they even begin to wrap their heads around it all?
Honestly, I'd say embrace the mystery.
Okay.
Don't feel like you need to have all the answers right away or come to some definitive conclusion. You know, the beauty of exploring these topics is that it opens up new possibilities, new ways of thinking.
Yeah.
It's about expanding your awareness, not necessarily finding concrete solutions.
So it's about the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly.
It's okay to be skeptical too, right?
Absolutely.
Question everything you read and hear.
Critical thinking is crucial when you're dealing with these kinds of ideas.
For sure.
Don't be afraid to challenge the information, consider different viewpoints, and form your own opinions.
So for someone just dipping their toes into these waters, what advice would you give them on how to approach all this responsibly?
Start with curiosity and an open mind.
Okay.
Be willing to entertain ideas that challenge your existing beliefs.
Right.
But don't throw critical thinking out the window.
Got it.
Look for evidence, check the sources, and be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
Yeah. Good advice.
Remember, it's not just about the information itself, but also the process of exploration.
Yeah, it's about engaging with these ideas in a thoughtful and discerning way.
Right. Exactly, and maybe even having a little fun with it.
Yeah, why not?
Don't take it all too seriously.
Yeah.
Allow yourself to be amazed, to be challenged, and just enjoy the ride.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from ancient texts and UFOs to simulations and the very nature of reality.
We have. It's been quite a deep dive.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
It's been a pleasure exploring these topics with you.
Likewise, and to everyone listening, thanks for sending us this amazing collection of material. It's really given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
If even a tiny bit of what we've talked about today is true,
Right.
what does that mean for how we understand history, religion, our place in the universe?
It's a question worth considering, for sure.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep an open mind.
The answers, or at least more interesting questions, are out there waiting to be discovered.
That's right. And until next time, keep diving deep.
See you then.